Welcome to Presence, a global conversation for a new earth, with hosts Doug King and Cody Deese.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Today we are broadcasting live from the beautiful Presence Studios in Mableton, Georgia. And being hosted today by Mr. Cody. How you doing, bud?
Well, I'm doing really well for our listeners. The Presence headquarters is in Decula, which is an amazing space. Which is probably about it's like an hour from where we sit right now.
Yeah.
And so where I live, which is where we are right now, we're sitting at my kitchen table.
Yeah.
And this is the first time we have not recorded from your place.
Yeah, we're branching out.
I know we are. So if you hear strange noises or anything weird that happens, just know this is a new space for us that periodically we need to use.
Absolutely.
And so, glad you're listening. Glad you're here. Doug, how are you feeling today?
Oh, man, I feel great, ready to roll.
Good. I love it. Okay, well, that said, let's get into, this is part 6 of our faith series.
Yep.
And we probably have a couple more to go of these. So we'll do like part 6, and then maybe we'll do another one, and then we'll wind the series down because we got some one-offs that we need to get to.
Yes.
Now, that said, you have been promising the people.
Exactly.
You've been promising the people
Yep.
justification by faith.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to open that can, and specifically in the context of Romans 5.
Yeah, that's a great place to go.
So we'll start there, and then to kind of give a little bit of the flow to our people, again, what we're doing is we're deconstructing what faith is, we're redefining what faith is, we're talking about the role and function of what faith is, and then we're talking about faith through the spiral and how it works, the Venn diagram, which we'll get into today as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the entire conversation we're having about faith.
Yeah.
Now, that said, today we're going to talk about justification by faith, and I want to jump in to Romans 5. So what I thought I would do is read a couple of verses, and then we can comment on it, and then just open it up and see where it goes, because we need to talk about condemnation and justification, because that's Romans 5.
Mm-hmm.
Probably need to talk about the wrath of God.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's an attention getter.
We should do that one, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Okay, great.
This is Romans 5, verse 1, and then I'll jump down actually to verse 8, because I think that's where we need to jump into.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, let me jump down to verse 8 here. But God demonstrates his love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood. Now that sounds like an archaic, ancient idea. Justified by blood. Since we've been justified by his blood. Now, here's an interesting phrase, and these are the phrases that I want to get into with you. How much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we're clear in the traditional stage of consciousness, and that's the world that I was raised in.
Mm-hmm.
They loved verses like this.
Sure.
Because it talks about God's wrath and that the only way we're saved is through Jesus.
Yeah.
From an integral framework and an integral theology, that takes on a whole new meaning that, as we talked about it earlier, it is just so liberating. So let's talk about this justification by faith, and then let's talk about the threads of justification and condemnation. Okay. So when we talk about condemnation, we talk about justification, talk to me about those two threads and where they meet up with each other and why both are necessary.
Okay, good point, because both are. And first of all, we'll refer people, Cody, to our Venn diagram that we'll have in the show notes. There's a link in your show notes today. And when you look at the Venn diagram, you'll see in the center section, which, as you know, is transform. Transform is not the end of a process. It's taking you to the end of a process, but there are two things going on in the process. If you look at the way we've labeled that, justification is a thread that starts at the cross with Jesus, runs all the way to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Condemnation, it runs in that same space. So you've got both of those running through the middle part of the Venn diagram at the same time.
And that those are the two threads that we have been tracing throughout this entire series.
Yes.
So could you say justification then would be Abraham and condemnation would be Adam?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a perfect way of saying it, because those two threads start there, and they were threads that had to do with the evolution of the process, and that process is not completed until you get to, guess what, the end. And Christ is the beginning of the end. But as we've seen before, the end is not limited to just Jesus, the individual, but you also have the collective involved, which is the body of Christ. Mm-hmm. And you have the macro, which is involved in the temple, the current world, the age that was, and then a new age coming. So you've got at the end, these last days that are in the middle part of this diagram are the last days of the story that is playing out in terms of the way God reveals what comes by faith and what resists faith or is opposed to faith. So you have both of these elements in there. And so the first thing that I'd make note of is that justification and condemnation are necessary to the human evolutionary experience. They're both necessary.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Okay, so a part of the evolution of deconstructing and reconstructing, or disorder and reorder, whatever language you want to use, a part of the process of evolving, right,
mm-hmm.
is you move from these different stages of consciousness.
Yes.
Into new stages of consciousness.
Yes.
And this is where I want to talk to you, because when I hear you use language like that,
mm-hmm.
I have all sorts of things floating in me because of the previous stages of consciousness that I've been in.
Yes.
And even some of the new stages of consciousness that I'm entering into. And I feel like that's probably where a lot of our audience is.
Oh, yeah.
Is when you hear about condemnation is necessary.
Yeah.
Well, I have two pulls in me.
Yeah.
One is I've tasted and seen the integral perspective of that, which is what I want you to talk about,
Sure.
which is where we're going. But the other side of that is fear and trembling, like
right.
condemned to hell.
Yes.
And that paints a picture of a deity that it's that sinners in the hands of an angry God that has ruined so many.
Oh, yeah.
But yet you can't deny that these two ideas are still in the text.
They're there, and they're there in the parables of Jesus with sheep and goats, and there is a judgment day. There's no denying all these things, which obviously we're not. What we're trying to say is that when you move to an integral perspective and you look at the text through an integral lens, you will see the way in which both condemnation and justification are simply part of a process that ends up with something much more than either justification or condemnation. And the much more is the salvation of God, the coming of the deliverer. And that salvation is much more than either justification or condemnation. And condemnation has a purpose, just like in Spiral. Think about it with us, folks. You've listened to the spiral dynamic explanations that we've had, and you know, Cody and I have talked many times about evolution happening when we all encounter the unworkable. That's how evolution, that's the purpose. The unworkable is not so that the human being then is finished, it's over, end of story. No, the unworkable has a purpose. And so if I look, Cody, at my life and I see things in either relationships or decisions I'm making or lifestyle or whatever it is in my life that's just not working anymore, and I know it's not working anymore, my decision to make a change because this is unworkable, my decision is going to lead me to the next best place. And when I enter that next best place, my decision to do so will be justified. At the same time, the things that I'm leaving are things that I'm actually saying I'm condemning. I'm condemning in the sense that they are no longer workable for my life. But God never, in the narrative or with me as a person, puts a period at the end of condemnation.
And that is an integral perspective and
Yes.
framework of
Yeah.
when we talk about condemnation, this is what we mean.
Huge.
And doesn't that take, at least for me, in some ways, it's like all kinds of emotions.
Yeah.
Because there's a side of me that I'm like, whew, that's like a release because it's not what I thought it was. But then
Right.
there's also like, but oh no, the unworkable.
Right. Sure. But, unworkable, again, that's why we're saying this is all a necessary part of the human journey, of human evolution, of spiritual consciousness. This is why you have both Adam and Abraham. Adam is representing that part of me that's going to be making decisions that are averse to spirit. They're going to be decisions that lead me to an unworkable situation. The garden becomes unworkable and Adam experiences exile. Later, Israel is going to experience exile. And even past that, Paul is going to show that sin and death have actually created an exile of bondage for all humanity. So that thing of exile, that thing of the unworkable or that which is condemned is a necessary part of my journey. And so is faith. Faith represents that part of my journey that is aligned to God. Because just as I want validation and acceptance of what I'm doing that is aligned with spirit, I also want revealed to me those things that are standing in the way of me having a much better life than I'm having now. So that's why both Adam and Abraham are representative of my life. And this is what reductionism does. Reductionism wants to make it an either or. Either you are Adam or you are Abraham. Either you are justified or you are condemned. That's the law. Now, when you go in law, you set up the judge and the judge declares you one or the other and puts a period at the end. And then you have a sentence of some kind. And Christianity has made that sentence an eternity in hell if it's condemnation.
But what's interesting to me is we intuitively all place ourselves on the right side of that.
Of course.
But how many are on the wrong side of that?
All the people that I'm judging.
Right. It's really convenient to have a paradigm like that when you have enemies.
Yes. It works real well. Or when egoically I want to feel really good about myself. It really does make me feel real good to know that I am justified before God. And I can see the problem in so many other people's lives that just don't get it right. They don't interpret the word right. They don't go to the right church. They don't do the right things or the right practices.
Come on.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Come on now, Doug.
Yeah.
It's like self-righteousness at the expense of others.
This is what it leads to. This is why Paul in Philippians, I quote, people probably get tired of me saying this, but this one hits me so hard. When Paul talked about being under the law, he talked about having a righteousness of his own. When you make justification by faith, the only way in which God can deliver humanity and the only way in which salvation can come to all, and we'll talk about the all here in just a minute, because that all is involved in the story. So if you're sitting there listening to this podcast and saying, well, it's only all who have faith that are going to be saved, then you're missing the whole point of what Paul's writing. As a matter of fact, that is the reason Paul is writing Romans, and that's why we're going to spend a lot of time with this book even later on this fall. But these two components, including the condemnation, are simply part of a process. And and condemnation plays a role, but it's not the end of the process. Salvation is always the end of the process.
And to kind of add a little bit to this condemnation, you can also insert the word wrath, which if you think about, and that's what verse 9, since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him?
Yes.
And when we talk about God's wrath, one of the things that we mention, again, I love condemnation, wrath, whatever you want to call it, but it's that integral framework that you just laid for us, which gives us a whole new meaning that condemnation is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
I mean, this isn't a negative thing. This is a beautiful thing.
I can embrace it.
Absolutely. And so we talked about how Paul makes a reference of giving us over to our choices and their consequences.
Yes.
And so those two threads, self as source,
Yep.
Spirit as source, or God as source.
Yes.
That's generally when we talk about the wrath of God. Is it fair to say when we talk about wrath, it's almost like a metaphor for the natural and supernatural or whatever consequences of self as source for us?
Absolutely. The wrath of God is to remove that which stands in the way of my growth. If you think about the phrase we use, the wrath of Mother Nature, no one says, "Oh, I hate Mother Nature because Mother Nature has wrath involved with her actions." No, what we say is, well, do we see now the purpose of the wrath of Mother Nature? It is to get rid of, let's say, a forest fire. It's to get rid of all the brush and the dead trees and the things that are preventing the forest from growing and flourishing even further. And in fact, the heat from the fire, as we well know, actually helps certain pine trees to release seeds under the intense heat of the forest fire that will replenish the forest in an even greater way. So we say, yeah, the wrath of Mother Nature is a natural part of the process of the evolutionary ongoing of our planet Earth. So it is with God. Cody, if you read the prophets and go all the way back to Amos and Obadiah and the guys that are prophesying back in the days of Israel, so many times they start their prophecy with some kind of woe to you, Israel, for this. Woe to you because you've treated people in this way, or you've marginalized, or you've practiced injustice. And there's all these condemnation type statements that are made against Israel. Will my wrath not come upon you? Will you not suffer these consequences? But at the end of every single book, if you just want to try this sometime, take some of those prophets and then go to the last chapter and see how the last chapter of every one of those prophecies works. It is God who says, but will I allow my children to be separated from me? Will I allow my children to perish? No. God always, after wrath, reconciles, restores, resurrects. This is the story that comes after condemnation. But I embrace condemnation because I want to know what are the things that are standing in the way of my abundance.
So condemnation for me, from a first-tier perspective, was God's wrath was punishment for our sin.
Yeah.
And maybe a good way to say an integral perspective is it's never been about punishment for our sin, as opposed to wrath can be translated as just consequences of our self as source.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's beautiful. And
well, I mean, give me an A+.
Well, I do.
Couple stars.
I do. So we're in great shape so far. Thank goodness, since we're at your house, I would not have to leave. Hey, and let me make one more quick point while I'm thinking about it. Because people return to a first-tier paradigm of either or, either I am justified or I am saved, and you are condemned or you are lost, and we put a period there at the end. Once that happens, we have regressed all the way back into the blue meme world of Moses and the law, which is an either or paradigm. And that means that I have to judge you, I have to judge myself, I have to judge every person on this planet, in the sense that I'm going to have to determine through my own intelligence, etc., whether or not you are justified, you are saved, you are condemned, you are lost. And look, we have used Christianity as an example of what we're saying. Christianity is the greatest example I can think of that shows the division that comes when you try to use that paradigm. There's a reason there's 30,000 plus denominations. It's because no human being will ever agree ultimately on who is justified, who is condemned, who is this, who is that. And this is why we have so many denominations. So Christianity itself, to me, is a testimony that this interpretation that we've used is in great need of an integral lens. And we're at a time in history where we're now ready for that integral lens so that we can reinterpret this great old story.
I love it. I want to get to 2 points before the end of this podcast.
Yep.
One is he keeps using this phrase. So if you read Romans 5, I love this. I mean, this is like, this is Paul at his best,
Yeah.
which is so funny. There's a whole other conversation. We should do a podcast on Paul.
Yeah.
Because so many of my friends can't stand the guy.
Exactly.
Because he seems barbaric, outdated.
Yeah.
Some of his views are just
Yeah.
misogynistic and
Yeah.
da-da-da-da. And what has been really helpful is when you take an integral framework, how so much of that has been redeemed for me, which is a whole nother conversation. Now, that said,
Yeah.
Romans 5, he keeps using this phrase. So if you even look at verses 8 through 10, how much more then,
Yeah.
having now been justified by his blood, we shall be, future tense, saved.
Yep.
Again, for if we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his son. Much more, having been reconciled, we, future tense, shall be saved. I want to jump down to even verse 15.
Okay.
But the free gift is not like the offense, for if by one man's offense many died, there it is again, much more the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abounded to many. So there's two phrases I want to talk about. He keeps talking about much more, and he also keeps talking in future tense, shall be. So I'm a little confused. So if you read that and you think about even for us, the Venn diagram,
Yeah.
and you look at what's transpiring in the center there, help our listeners understand when he's using future tense, from a blooming perspective, that was always, oh yeah, it is to come.
Yes.
Like we will be saved.
Yes.
But then there's always confusion in the church diagrams. It's like, wait, so were we justified or were we not justified?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, but it's not complete
Right.
until, and they would
Yeah.
say like year 2000 or whatever, but no one really knows the season or time, but it is
Yeah.
coming. And that's what John wrote about in Revelation. And we're like, not quite.
Right. And this is why when you really start questioning the views that we've been handed down over the centuries, they begin to fall apart after the enormous number of experiences that we've all had with them. And this is the way evolution works. And this is why the things that you're talking about, Cody, they're not adding up anymore. And it's because we're really questioning them now. We're not just taking a sermon and running with it as a story that is the end of all things. And so the much more, when I read Romans like you do, really helps frame the fact that the two threads, first of all, condemnation and justification, are running through the middle. The much more is the salvation that occurs when we enter into that second circle. When you enter into the new heaven and earth, that's a salvific, to use a theological term.
I like it.
It works great at parties. Use the term salvific.
And then my wife's favorite, eschatological.
Eschatological. Eschatological. Catalogical. I want to be. So when you go in New Jerusalem, okay, you have moved into and had an experience of salvation, because salvation is just deliverance. Salvation is the movement from, say, bondage to freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Those are biblical threads that run through there. So what's happening is this. Once the salvation of God is revealed, which is the whole point of the narrative from the beginning all the way through the end in the book of Revelation, once that is revealed, I now see those things that lead me to an experience of unworkable or an experience of the corruptible, or things that I want to condemn in the sense that I find them unworkable and I want to move beyond them. And I see the things in my life that are justified. I was justified for making this commitment to Danae. I was justified in working with her in this relationship as I have. I have justified in doing the same thing with kids, and justified in the way I've tried to act toward my neighbors, because I'm enjoying abundance. And so the natural result of that, the fruits of the Spirit, are outward justifying elements that I made good decisions there. I embrace both the fact that I have peace, love, and joy in my life through the things that have been faithful to the Spirit. And I also embrace the fact that when I experience the unworkable, there are things in my life that need to change. What I really find extremely inspirational and that bring me great peace is the fact that at the end of it all, my salvation, the salvation that is brought by God as source, is a salvation that is in opposition to the condemnation that came through Adam. And that is a salvation that is always there, always accepting, always present, and that there isn't anything that can take that away. And so in that sense, what we're seeing then is a Venn diagram. Salvation belongs in the second circle, and it follows. Salvation only comes at the end, whereas justification and condemnation are leading up to the end.
And the end is not future tense for us.
No.
We're talking again, as you look at the diagram, you see where the end lies.
Yeah, because if I'm in the kingdom of God has no end. God has no end. I'm in spirit. Spirit has no end. The only things that have an end are the things like a temporal city, a temporal land, all the things that apply to outward things.
You might say form.
End. Form. That's a good word. I need to remember that. That'd actually look good in my diagram.
Okay, we're running out of time. Let's do this. Let's stop there. And then in the next episode, what I want to get into is a couple of questions, but I want to talk about Adam and Jesus.
Yeah.
Because we need to come back to Romans 5. And that'd be a good way to end this whole series, because I want to talk about that if by one man sinned into the world. Then so let's talk about that. And then just some basic questions. So we'll get real pragmatic in the next episode. What about people with no faith?
Yeah.
What in this integral framework, second tier, like what is faith for you right now in these days?
Sure.
And then what about people who do operate self as source their entire lives? Like what does their reality look like? What does their future look like? So that'll be the next episode.
Beautiful.
All right. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week. Hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us at info@presence.tv. You can also visit our website at presence.tv or find us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you.